knew something was off the moment I stepped onto my back patio that warm Saturday morning. The sweet smell of freshly cut grass hit my nose, but underneath it, a nagging frustration brewed. My 5-gallon gas can, my trusty bright red lifeline for my lawnmower, was almost empty again. And it wasn't just low, it was mysteriously vanishing faster than it should have. I swear, I barely used enough to fill my little 1-quart mower tank. At first, I tried to convince myself I was just forgetting how much gas I poured last week, but the pattern was too consistent, too sharp to ignore. Every time I looked, the can seemed lighter. A dull, sinking suspicion started to gnaw at me. Maybe it was nothing, maybe I was just overthinking, but deep down, a tiny, insistent voice whispered, "Someone's taking it." The neighbor next door, Larry, I hated even saying his name. He was one of those men who smiled too much, like he had a secret that made the world his personal playground, always wearing those cheap polos and khaki shorts, trimming his yard just so, nodding politely when I waved, but I could feel his eyes on my property, always lurking, always watching. I hadn't realized just how far he'd take his lawn envy until one morning, after filling my mower and walking inside, I noticed a faint chemical odor lingering longer than usual. Gas or something else? My stomach twisted. I decided it was time to find out, no assumptions. Back then, cheap and easy security cameras weren't a thing. No Nest, no Ring, nothing plug and play. So I improvised. I pulled out my old laptop, dusted it off, and set up a motion detection program. It was clunky, finicky, and barely reliable, but it worked, just enough. I positioned it near the back door, angled so I could see anyone stepping onto my patio. 5 minutes after I left the house the next morning, the alert popped up. There he was, Larry, creeping onto my backyard like a cartoon villain, lifting my red gas can, stuffing it into his car and mower with smug satisfaction. My blood boiled. I paced the living room for half an hour, trying to calm down, but the frustration wouldn't let me. How dare he? How dare he walk into my backyard as if he owned it, stealing a gas can like it was candy from a baby? I sat down and stared at the screen, replaying the footage over and over. My mind raced through every possible retaliation. Calling the cops felt excessive, and I didn't want a war with him escalating into threats or worse. No, I wanted something smarter, something satisfying, something that made him squirm exactly the way he had made me squirm every time I realized my gas was gone. A plan began to form. Messy and mischievous, but perfect in its petty justice. I set out a fresh gas can on the back patio, making sure he would see it clearly from his window across the fence. I wanted him to know I was leaving, that I'd be gone on a trip soon. I packed my bag, fussed over my car, checked my oil like I always did, but this time I made a big show of it, dragging my keys in a way that Larry could clearly observe from his yard. And here's where it got delightfully wicked. The next time I had to use the bathroom, I did something I never thought I'd do. I emptied my bladder in the gas can. I filled it with piss, yet left just enough gasoline scent that a fool would never notice the difference. It smelled like gas, but was, well, a lot more personal than that. I felt a thrill of guilt and excitement twisting together. This was petty, sure, but it was my revenge, and it was brilliant. I left the can exactly where he could find it, on the back patio, right in the open. My heart raced every time I glanced out the window, imagining his reaction. The anticipation was intoxicating. I knew he'd be back. He had to be. The next morning, I stepped outside early, coffee in hand, and caught him. Larry was at it again. He tiptoed into the yard, the same smug grin plastered across his face. He grabbed the can, pulled it toward him, and wheeled it to his mower. And then he tried to start it. I couldn't see his face clearly from this distance, but the muffled curses and the sudden frantic yanking of the starter rope told me everything I needed to know. He didn't get it started. He didn't even come close. I could hear the spluttering, the chugging, the occasional "damn it" and "what the hell" from a few houses down. I wanted to laugh so badly, but I didn't. I sipped my coffee, trying to look casual like I wasn't watching his entire meltdown unfold from my window. Every tug of the rope made me grin behind my mug. Every red flush across his face was a little victory of justice. It was petty, sure, but it was my revenge, and it was brilliant. Larry, my friendly neighbor, had underestimated me. He thought I was oblivious. He thought I'd never notice, but I was watching, planning, and one step ahead. Little did he know this was just the beginning. I wasn't going to stop at a messy prank, not when there was so much more at stake and so much more fun to be had. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the morning sun on my face, and whispered to myself, "This is just the warm-up, Larry. You have no idea what's coming." And at that moment, the unthinkable occurred. My laptop beeped, signaling another motion alert. But it wasn't Larry this time. It was something far more unexpected, something that would push this petty revenge into a territory I hadn't anticipated. Cliffhanger. I froze, staring at the screen as the motion detection highlighted a shadow moving through my backyard that wasn't Larry. My heart skipped a beat. Who else knew about my little revenge setup? I couldn't move, my eyes glued to the laptop screen, the cursor highlighting that shadow slipping across my backyard, heart hammering in my chest. For a second, I wondered if I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a tree branch swaying in the wind. But no, the movement was deliberate, calculated. Someone else was there. Panic flared for a moment. I had rigged the motion detection and webcam for him, not anyone else. My mind raced. Who else could be on my property? The thought that someone could be watching me, sneaking around, made my stomach twist. Then the screen froze, the shadow clearly crouched by the red gas can, and that's when I recognized the outline, unmistakable even from that distance. Larry. He had returned earlier than I anticipated, and this time he wasn't just sneaking, he was inspecting, almost like he knew something was off. A thrill ran through me. My little trap was working. He hadn't noticed yet, couldn't know, that the can he'd been stealing from for weeks was now a weapon in my arsenal. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend to check on something while I stayed glued to the screen. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but excitement. I had always prided myself on my patience, my cunning, and now it was paying off. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Larry tugged the rope on his mower again and again, his face red and twisted with frustration. The muffled cursing, the strained yanks. Ugh, it was glorious. But I had to stay focused. I wasn't done yet. I decided it was time for the next phase. I went back inside and rummaged through my cabinets, finding more items that could be used to escalate the plan. Rubber gloves, empty bottles, a couple of tools. If he thought he was winning, I was about to remind him who was really in control. By now, Larry was muttering so loudly that I could hear him from my kitchen window. "What the hell is wrong with this thing?" he yelled. "This doesn't make any sense. I just filled it. Filled it!" He banged his fist against the side of the mower. I could barely contain my laughter. It was around then that I noticed something else. The gas can was still partially full. My initial plan had worked, but I realized I had to make the next move quickly before Larry figured out the smell was off. I grabbed a funnel and added just a touch more personalized fuel, ensuring that it looked, smelled, and felt normal enough to fool anyone who wasn't paying attention. Sitting back down, I replayed the footage from the webcam. Every movement he made, every exasperated gesture, every curse word. Gold. It was almost cinematic. And I knew this wasn't just about petty revenge anymore. It was about justice, about teaching someone who thought they could take what wasn't theirs a lesson they'd never forget. At the same time, I felt a rush of guilt. This wasn't me normally. I wasn't the type to exact revenge like this. But Larry, Larry deserved every ounce of discomfort I could possibly throw at him. And the more I watched, the more I realized how satisfying it was to be in control, to turn the tables on someone who had been violating my space for so long. Around mid-morning, I took a break to check my car, making sure it was ready for a trip. I left the front door open just a crack so Larry could see me bustling around. I wanted him to think I was leaving, that I'd be gone for a while, giving him the perfect opportunity to make the fatal mistake, stealing the can again. If you've ever felt this kind of betrayal, hit the like button and subscribe to hear how I survived this. There's nothing worse than realizing someone you've tolerated living next door to for years could take advantage of your trust so blatantly. And this story only gets messier from here. By late afternoon, I spotted him again through the fence. He had rolled his mower into his front yard, dragging the gas can behind him. His movements were frantic, almost desperate, and I swear I saw him muttering calculations under his breath, like he was trying to figure out how much gas he was actually stealing. I decided it was time to take it a step further. I left the house, grabbed a few items from the garage, and staged them in plain sight. A wrench, some bottles of water, and a couple of sunglasses on the hood of my car. The goal was simple: make him think I was stepping out for a long trip, creating the perfect setup for the next act of justice. When I returned about an hour later, I was met with the sight I had been waiting for. Larry was struggling in his front yard, his mower sputtering, smoke curling up from the engine, his face red and furious. He pulled the starter rope over and over, cursing at the sky. I could barely hide my grin from behind the blinds. Every yank of that rope, every frustrated shout, it was working. My little prank had escalated into full-blown karma, and I couldn't help but wonder, how far would he go before he figured it out? How long would it take him to connect the dots and realize he'd been outsmarted? But just as I was about to step away, feeling satisfied, something unexpected happened. He got into his car, seemingly giving up on the mower for the moment. I thought the plan had worked, until a few blocks up the road, the car sputtered, coughed, and died. Complete breakdown. I smirked, knowing exactly why. My little revenge had followed him farther than I had imagined. By the time I checked my back patio, the gas can was empty. Perfect. Every bit had been used, exactly as I intended. And yet, as satisfying as it was, I felt a strange twinge of nervousness. Larry wasn't just a petty thief. As I dug a little deeper into his life while waiting for him to get home, I discovered something far worse. Arrest warrants, multiple. This guy was a ticking bomb, and my little prank could have turned into something bigger than I had planned. I realized I was holding a wild card in my hands, and in that moment a bold idea formed, one that would take my revenge from petty to permanent justice, and it required careful planning. I smiled to myself, heart racing. Larry thought he was winning. He thought he'd gotten away with it, but I had only just begun, and what came next would change everything. Cliffhanger. As I stared out the window, I knew I had to act fast, but little did Larry know, the trap I was about to set wouldn't just humiliate him, it might land him in jail. How far was I willing to go to make sure justice was served? I had never felt quite like this before, so focused, so calculated. Sitting in my living room, I watched the empty gas can on my back patio like it was a trophy. Larry had fallen for the first part of my plan without even realizing it. He had underestimated me, assumed I was oblivious, and now, well, now it was payback time. I sipped my coffee, eyes glued to the motion alerts. He had retreated to his house after his car broke down a few blocks away, probably thinking I had no idea. But I knew every move he made. Every misstep was recorded, cataloged, and filed in my mind. The sense of control was intoxicating. I decided it was time to escalate. No more waiting, no more half measures. Larry needed to feel the consequences of his actions in a way he'd never forget. Over the next few days, I began subtle tactics to unnerve him, small psychological nudges that would make him question his own reality. I left the back patio light on at odd hours, making it seem like I was home when I wasn't. I'd sometimes walk past my window at night, pretending to be unaware, making sure he caught sight of me. The tension was delicious. I also started leaving things out that weren't mine, tools, random items, carefully arranged to look like I was watching. Larry noticed, of course. I could see him pacing in his yard, glancing nervously toward my house as if expecting me to jump out at any moment. The anxiety on his face was palpable. I couldn't stop smiling. One afternoon, I decided to take it even further. I created another trip scenario. Bags were packed, car fueled, and I made a show of checking fluids, just like before. This time, I made sure he saw me leave the house. He was peeking through his blinds like a hawk. I knew he'd be back. He couldn't resist the temptation. And he didn't. About 20 minutes after I left, the alert went off. Larry was back, creeping into my backyard like a cartoon villain. The way he moved, hesitant, cautious, almost paranoid, made me chuckle behind my laptop. He had clearly remembered my last stunt. He was expecting something, but he had no idea what I had planned next. This time, I had a new trick up my sleeve. I had sprinkled some of the piss gas mixture into a few other containers around the patio, not enough to ruin anything permanently, just enough to create confusion and paranoia. The second he picked up the main gas can, he noticed the subtle differences, an unfamiliar smell, a slight stickiness. I could see him pause, brow furrowed, muttering to himself. I leaned back, sipping my coffee, letting the tension build, watching him second-guess every move, every action. It was perfect. I had never enjoyed being this vindictive before, but the satisfaction was undeniable. Around mid-morning, he finally pulled out his mower, hoping the mixture wouldn't affect him this time. But as he yanked the starter rope, the sputtering began again. His face went red, veins bulging, and I could hear his shrieks of frustration echoing down the street. If you've ever been in a situation where someone was stealing from you repeatedly, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is about more than just petty revenge. It's about taking back control when someone continually violates your trust. I watched him pace, curse, and yank the mower like a man possessed. His frustration was escalating in real time. I began to wonder, how far could I push him? How long before he snapped completely? But I didn't want him to snap yet. I wanted him to feel the slow burn of paranoia, the creeping doubt that something was always off when it came to my property. Every glance he cast my way, every nervous twitch, it was like music. Then came the breakthrough. I had submitted a little paperwork through a local sheriff's program, completely under the guise of a ride-along experience in his name. Nothing obvious, nothing illegal, just enough to put the law on his radar without him realizing it. I watched as notifications slowly trickled in, confirmations he was unaware of, his legal troubles quietly creeping closer. The satisfaction surged through me. I had turned my revenge from annoying pranks into a calculated strategy that combined embarrassment, paranoia, and legal consequences. Larry had no idea that in the next few days, his life was about to crumble in ways he would never see coming. By late afternoon, I returned home, pretending I had just come from errands. I saw him from across the street, pacing, muttering, and glancing at my house constantly. The paranoia was eating him alive. He had no idea which part of my yard was safe, which containers were sabotaged, or what I knew about him. Every glance he threw over his shoulder, every twitch of his hand, it was gold. And then it happened. The muffled sound of his mower sputtering reached my ears once again, but this time it wasn't just frustration, it was panic. He dropped the starter rope, muttering a string of curses that made my ears burn. My little trap had escalated beyond comedy into chaos. I smiled. This was perfect. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning, Larry. You have no idea what's coming next." I had planted the seeds of fear, uncertainty, and legal trouble. I had orchestrated every detail, and now the next phase of my plan was about to unfold, a phase that would not only humiliate him, but would potentially ensure he paid for every misdeed he had ever committed. Cliffhanger. I watched him retreat into his house, muttering under his breath, and then an unexpected sound caught my attention, sirens in the distance, growing louder. Could it be? Had my little legal maneuver finally triggered something bigger? I could barely breathe. The sirens in the distance were growing louder, and my heart was racing, not from fear, but from the sheer thrill of watching my plan take shape. I had orchestrated this carefully, and now it was hitting its crescendo. Larry's luck, his arrogance, and his little theft habit were about to collide with something far bigger than he could handle. I had spent days meticulously setting everything up: the prank gas cans, the subtle sabotage of his lawn tools, and the ride-along sheriff paperwork, all little pieces of a puzzle that were now clicking together. And as the sirens drew nearer, I realized this was the payoff I had been waiting for. From my vantage point behind the curtains, I saw Larry pacing, muttering, face red and wild. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he had outsmarted me, that his petty thefts were hidden behind his polite neighborly facade. But the reality? He had no control anymore. Every move, every reaction, every frustrated yell, everything had been anticipated, logged, and manipulated. The first squad car turned onto our street. I could see the officers talking into their radios, scanning the area. Larry froze mid-step, eyes darting toward the vehicles. I almost felt sorry for him, but only for a second. This was poetic justice, years in the making. I remembered my first encounter with him when the gas first started disappearing. I had been irritated, frustrated, but also unsure. Back then, I never imagined it would escalate to this, watching him cornered by law enforcement without realizing he had dug his own trap. As the officers approached, I could see the panic overtaking him. He was sweating, pacing in circles, checking doors, muttering about who called them and what the hell did I do. It was delicious, watching his composure crumble under the weight of his own actions. I sat down, coffee in hand, and let myself smile. This was the moment every slight, every theft, every little act of violation came back to him. All the frustration I had bottled up over the weeks, all the subtle plotting, was finally paying off in full force. And then it got better. One of the officers knocked on his door, badge in hand, and called out Larry's full name. I had never said it aloud myself, but in that moment, hearing the official voice speak it sent a thrill through me. Larry's face went pale. He opened the door, fumbling with his words, trying to act casual, but the officers were unwavering. They had paperwork, warrants, details. Every minor crime, every unresolved ticket, every little legal infraction, all compiled and ready. I leaned closer to the window, heart pounding. This was my handiwork. Every step had been orchestrated carefully, from documenting his theft of my gas to the subtle psychological pressure I applied, and finally to putting the law in motion. The officers spoke clearly, citing warrants and explaining his rights. Larry was dumbfounded, sputtering excuses, but there was no getting out of it. I had to hide my laughter when he tried to make some pathetic protest about misunderstandings and neighbors spying. It was too late. The law had caught up with him, and he had no idea that I had been the architect behind it. This was more than petty revenge now. It was justice. Larry's arrogance, his sense of entitlement, and his repeated violations of my property had all led to this moment. He had assumed the world owed him obedience, that he could take without consequence, and now he was facing it all. I remembered the first gas can, the frustration I had felt, the subtle thrill of noticing it disappear again and again. Who would have thought that a little ingenuity, combined with patience and a keen sense of observation, could bring such satisfaction? Halfway through the ordeal, I felt a pang of reflection. This wasn't just about Larry stealing my gas anymore. It was about boundaries, respect, the audacity of someone thinking they could take from you repeatedly and get away with it, and the rush of knowing that finally someone had to pay, and it was going to be him, was intoxicating. If you've ever dealt with someone taking advantage of your trust, hit the like button and subscribe. This story is about more than just gas cans. It's about standing up,
taking control, and ensuring that those who hurt you understand the consequences. I watched as they led him out of his house, hands cuffed behind his back, face twisted in confusion and anger. He glanced over at my window, probably assuming I was laughing, but I remained perfectly still, calm, and observant. The satisfaction was overwhelming. Every day of plotting, every small prank, every carefully timed observation had culminated in this moment. As they escorted him to the police car, I caught a glimpse of his neighbors watching. Their expressions ranged from shock to amusement, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. I had done this quietly, meticulously, and with no one the wiser until now. Once the police car drove off, leaving the street quiet, I sank into my chair. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, but a strange calm followed. Larry's petty theft, arrogance, and intimidation was over, at least for now. Yet I knew this was only the beginning. There were still details to handle, consequences to monitor, and personal satisfaction to fully realize. Justice had been served in the immediate sense, but the psychological closure, the sweet feeling of reclaiming control over my life and property, was only just starting. And in that moment, I realized revenge, when executed with patience, creativity, and a hint of cunning, wasn't just about payback, it was about empowerment. Larry would remember this for the rest of his life. Every time he thought about my yard, my house, my vigilance, he would feel a shiver of fear, a pang of regret, and the undeniable truth that he had misjudged me completely. I smiled to myself. This was a victory I had earned, calculated and exact, and yet, deep down, I knew there was one final piece of the puzzle left, something that would completely undo everything if I didn't handle it carefully. Larry's arrest was only the beginning, but the next step required me to act with precision. Could I finish what I had started without letting him slip through my fingers?